Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those hoping to grow theirs. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we are setting the idea of solving aside, because we are definitely not solving today's problem. So welcome to Mitigated. Today, we're going back to fundamentals. The old idea that you sort of need to walk before you can run, and that applies to a lot of things. You must know how to do math before you can use a calculator. You must know how to write before you can have ChatGPT do it for you. And in that vein, you should really know how to do like pretty much anything that you want to offload to an AI chatbot. Like last week, today's topic was inspired by a conversation I had recently. A family friend told me a story about their experience of adding ChatGPT to their writing process for work. And they did it in an interesting way, like not the way I think most people do it. Rather than having a bot write their first draft that they would then edit, they actually tried writing the draft themselves and then would ask the chatbot for feedback. Like, hey, can I, how would you suggest I improve this, right? And being a fairly good writer, the comments they got back from the bot were unsurprisingly like positive and supportive with only a few minor suggestions for improvement. And this went on for a little while before she started getting suspicious and asked ChatGPT if it was ever actually critical of a user when asked to give feedback. And the response the bot gave was essentially no. It was designed to be toxically positive and supportive, even when someone really needs to be told that their writing was completely shitting the bed. And beyond that experience, there were other people in this family friend's office who didn't have as strong of a background in writing, and they were also trying to use ChatGPT to revise texts that they were responsible for, and the results ended up being total crap. And so there are 2 points here. The first is that you really need to know how chatbots work and what their limitations are before you start to depend on them, so you don't get misled by not realizing that it's going to tell you you're great no matter what. And then the second is that if you can't tell the difference between good writing and bad writing, then using a chatbot might be about as helpful as using a calculator on a math problem that you don't understand to begin with. So a calculator will accurately calculate what you put into it, but if you don't know what to put into it, crap in, crap out. And on the calculator metaphor, which I think is going to come up a lot today, when I was in 4th grade and we were transitioning from standard multiplication tables to higher level math concepts, we got to use calculators in class for the first time. And my teacher, shout out to Miss Rogers, explained the whole idea this way. She said, you must know how to do the math problem well enough that you can tell when the calculator is wrong. Only then can you know to go back and check your work and find your mistakes. In other words, you need to have a good grasp of the fundamentals so that the use of technology elevates your abilities, because if you don't, those same tools will actually end up holding you back. Which brings us to our first article, AI will never be your kid's friend. It's from The Atlantic, and it says, quote, the chatbot's appeal to kids, especially teens, is obvious. Unlike human friends, these AI companions will think all your jokes are funny. They're programmed to be endlessly patient and to validate most of what you say. For a generation already struggling with anxiety and social isolation, these digital relationships can feel like a refuge. But learning to be part of a community means making mistakes and getting feedback on those mistakes, end quote. And then just a little later in the article, it says, quote, Whether at camp or in classrooms, the difficulties children encounter in human relationships, the negotiations, compromises, and occasional conflicts are essential for developing social and emotional intelligence. When kids substitute these challenging exchanges for AI friendships that lack any friction, they miss crucial opportunities for growth. End quote. So, I mean, you can sort of tell we're going to go in a few different directions today, but whether you are doing work, writing, solving math problems, or learning to be human, there are a lot of pitfalls that we need to learn to avoid. And traditionally, on this show and on our other show, Best of the Left, available anywhere you get your podcasts, we much prefer to deal in systemic forces. What problems can we address at the systemic level so that the benefits filter down? With AI, there's the long-term hope for regulation of some sort, but that is not happening anytime soon. Congress is actually going in the
No.
opposite direction.
Yep.
And so what we have now is mitigation strategies for individuals. Good luck, everyone. And that's the best we can do.
Yeah. It is amazing to me that the companies themselves get to implement the age restrictions on their products. Like that we are in such a Wild West scenario that they think like we're regulating it. Like 13 and 14-year-olds can use our chatbots. Based on what? Based on like what study evaluation? There is nothing out there that would inform that and allow a company to make that call with any sort of confidence, but they do. And we have, I mean, it's happening right as we speak. There's all this talk about how the Trump administration is going to say no regulation, you do you, just keep living in this Wild West world. And we do not know, like, it is bad enough. We are starting to learn how this is affecting adults. We have no idea what the impacts will be on young children. And so, once again, it's like the second era of what social media was, where young kids will start using this technology. And then years later, we'll find out, like, oh, that was really bad for them. Guess we better do something about that. So, a whole generation gets screwed in the process. It reminds me of being a 90s kid, using the internet for the first time, getting in chat rooms that I should not have been in, but like
Oh, no.
nobody understood how to like quell that. They didn't understand the level of supervision that was required for the internet for children. And this again is likely unsupervised for the most part because the company says they're of age. Go forth. And like, good God, it is. It's chatbots and social media all over again.
Yeah, and I mean, the corporation as the regulator has been a standard for so long now that it's like hard to act
Yeah,
shocked by it. But as
exactly.
you pointed out, I mean, this is an intense risk because I do think social media has proven how damaging it is for youth. What do we think AI is going to be able to offer? Like, I'm not saying that they're the exact same thing, but there's definitely warning signs that maybe it's not appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for me because I don't
Yeah,
understand it
I
to the extent that I need.
Agreed.
So it's hard to imagine under 18, under 25 when your brain's not fully developed, things like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine.
This is something, obviously, as a parent of a 7-year-old, I'm starting to think about a lot more. I recently watched a video from a cybersecurity expert talking about the 5 things he would not let his child do as a cybersecurity expert. And I can't remember all 5 off the top of my head, but 4 of them, no social media at all until they're in their late teens. No phone until they're in their late teens. No electronics at all in private spaces, because I think we talked about it last week, just the idea that when you're online playing a video game, it's kind of the chat room of the 90s.
Yeah.
Who knows what you're going to run into? And
Yeah.
then another one that was important was that no cell phone at all until you have a conversation about sexploitation. And
Yep.
that's a word I hadn't actually heard. I knew exactly what he meant when he said it, but yeah, Jesus Christ. And that's just human to human interaction. Now you've got this AI component where apparently there are a lot of people who do not understand what it is and are talking to it as if it's some sort of higher entity and consciousness and something you can actually just have conversations with. but I mean, there's just so little we actually know about where it gets its information, how it makes its decisions. Clearly, it is kind of held to the will of its owners, as Grok AI just recently turned into a Nazi on Twitter and then subsequently got them a contract with the government a week later. So this government is not going to regulate this. It's really obvious that, as Jay said, this is a mitigation episode because we're on our own on how to deal with this. So we're going to have to deal with it on a very individual basis.
And the other component of this is I don't understand what the value of a child using an AI to talk to as a friend, not as a tool. Like the things that were mentioned in this article are, Polybuzz and Character AI, and they are chat with AI friends. So what is the value of that to a child? And I know they'll make up something and oh, it's getting them used to using AI because that's the future and some, garbage thing like that. There is no value to that. Children need to learn how to interact with other humans at that age. There's no value to sitting there talking to a robot who will be perfect in a way that no human ever will be, and then you are starting from behind the curve when you enter society and start interacting with other humans, or you just pull yourself away completely because no one will ever meet that standard. That is an actual direct disservice to children. That is harming their development. And the fact that these companies are acting like this is some fun game is wildly off the mark.
I think you're thinking about it from a human perspective. Clearly, there's no value
Yeah,
for
I
a
am,
child,
yeah.
but for a profit value,
Yeah,
they're
it.
trying to get you hooked to a product,
Well,
get you used
exactly,
to
and
it, and they're
that's the point.
using. Yeah, they don't have our interest in any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form at heart. And it reminds me a lot of the mid 80s when kids started getting directly marketed to through cartoons and commercials so that they would harass parents to buy toys or buy candy or buy McDonald's or whatever it was.
Mhm.
And this is similar, but I think way worse.
Mhm.
Who knows long term, but I think way worse.
This article presented a little scene that the writer witnessed of a couple relatively small kids getting into a tiny squabble. And there were tears and sadness. And then 10 minutes later, they were over it because that's how kids are. And that was used as an example of that's exactly what kids need to have happen, right? They need to have little confrontations so that they can learn what a confrontation is, how to avoid them, how to deal with them. I learned, not that long ago about how the mind sort of works and the social evolutionary benefit of why people think about their day as they're going to sleep or maybe even dream about it. And they will go over in their head, how did people feel when I said that? Did I get a good reaction? Did I get a bad reaction? People it sort of it spins in their mind, but that's a way of assessing how their social interactions went over the course of the day, come up with some ideas. Did that go well? Did it not go well? Should I change? And that is the process by which humans integrate themselves into what we call a society where people can sort of get along and know how to talk to each other. And I'm going to do the thing where I really reach for ways in which AI could be used positively, just to give it as an example that is in contrast to the have an AI friend because that's fun or whatever. I have heard, and I think it was adults doing this, but it was adults who were lonely. Maybe they were trying to figure out how to date, or, maybe they were trying to overcome social anxiety, that sort of thing. And they would talk with an AI chatbot as a really low level therapist or friend. And they'd sort of explain to the chatbot, this is what happened. How could I have done that better? And they'd get a little feedback and talked about how, no, this genuinely made me better at communicating with humans. But that's kind of exactly the point we're getting at here, is that these things can be tools if used as tools. They're not 100%, well, I mean, to say that they're not 100% good is obvious, but they're not 100% bad either. They can be a relatively neutral tool, and the outcome is totally based on how you use it. That's an example of, look, like if you want to use AI to increase your interpersonal emotional intelligence, that's possible, but not by becoming friends with the bot.
Yeah.
Maybe a bot would have some suggestions on how to better talk with humans, and then you go implement that, the very next day or the next time you have one of those interactions. Like, I can imagine that being positive, but it really just goes to show the distinction between how these could be good and how they would only be detrimental if you end up leaning on them too hard to replace humans, or I'm lonely, so I'm going to talk with AI. Like, nope, it only makes you more lonely. There are also studies that show that very clearly.
I think it's just hard because of like how human psychology works that like you may start using it as a tool, but it is hard not to fall into that familiarity. It's hard not to get stuck in the feedback loop. Of course, in the background, these are things that, if not heavily based in capitalism, are leading up to that. Because, obviously, one of the things is like, how are they going to get ads in this? How are they going to prioritize the information that you get? So, like, that is, of course, in the background, but humans fall into the trap because of, our humanness, our feelings, how our brain works.
Mhm.
That I think even using it as a tool, it just makes it easy to transition into that more friendly relationship that then is leaning on bots as friends, I guess, is the outcome.
Yeah. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the best way to learn about other humans is to interact with other humans. You could maybe get some advice. I'm not saying that isn't possible, but the best way is to interact with other humans.
Quick correction, because as the conversation went on, I realized that what I was remembering about the people who had used AI to increase their emotional intelligence, I framed that as they were talking to him as a low level therapist or friend. I'm now remembering that that was like their AI girlfriend that they were talking to.
Yeah,
And they were, yeah,
that
sorry.
rings a bell. Yeah,
Yeah, they were reporting back to a journalist about their AI girlfriend and how their AI girlfriend was helping them in their human to human relationships
Mm.
as well. And so they were trying to have both and have each improve the other. So that's certainly, well, right. It's messy.
Yeah, it's
Humans
the
are
blurring of
messy.
the lines. I mean, like, humans are
Exactly.
messy. Exactly, yeah.
Actually, I thought the best line of this article was, but human relationships aren't products to be optimized. They're complex interactions that require practice and patience. And ultimately, they're what makes life worth living. And that's something I think is going to be a theme that keeps coming up here. Like, where is the value exactly? And how do we make sure that we're only using tools as tools in ways that are assisting and not redirecting where we get value from our lives?
Oh, that's so subjective. What if we just come up with different reasons for living that align
Oh
with the profit
boy.
motives of
All
corporations?
right,
Then it's a
yeah.
Peter
win-win.
Thiel, calm down.
All right. It brings us to our next topic, slightly different. There was a big story out of MIT. There was a study that suggested that ChatGPT, this is the Time headline, ChatGPT may be eroding critical thinking skills. And essentially, the study tried to test the impacts of using ChatGPT to help write essays on the brain. Like, what does it do inside your head to use a tool like that? Super quick breakdown is they had three groups. One had to write an essay without the use of a computer at all, or maybe they could type, but they couldn't do any searching or AI or anything. The second group could use Google for research, and the third group could use ChatGPT to help them with the essays. And they studied the brain activities of the subject while they were writing. And obviously, the brain only group, their brains were the most active, and the ChatGPT people's brains were the least active, not at all surprising. And then they also, I think also not surprising, the people who used ChatGPT like didn't remember almost anything about the essays they air quotes wrote. And so that's the big headline. That's the big takeaway. The twist at the end. I'm going to read a summary. This is from a different article that was very gently critical of this research. And so the conversation.com wrote this article. MIT researchers say using ChatGPT can rot your brain. The truth is a little more complicated. And so they describe the final part of the study. It says, quote, interestingly, participants switched roles for a final fourth essay. The brain only group used AI and vice versa. The AI to brain group performed worse and had engagement that was only slightly better than the other groups during their first session, far below the engagement of the brain only group in their third session. The authors claim this demonstrates how prolonged use of AI led to participants accumulating cognitive debt. When they finally had the opportunity to use their brains, they were unable to replicate the engagement or perform as well as the other two groups. End quote. But this article goes on to argue that the brain only group benefited from what's called the familiarization effect from having written three essays first using their brains before doing the fourth with the help of ChatGPT and vice versa. So when the group that had been using AI switched to only using their brains, they were sort of effectively doing the task for the first time. They didn't benefit from the familiarization effect of having done three essays before because they totally offloaded it to ChatGPT. So what holds is that using ChatGPT means you're not using your brain, you're not going to remember anything you did, and if you try to not use it, you're starting from scratch. What's not necessarily true is that using AI made them less able to use their brains. They didn't go into negative territory necessarily. They just went back to zero. Now, interestingly, this article brought the issue back to calculators as well. It says, quote, to understand the current situation with AI, we can look back to what happened when calculators first became available. Back in the 1970s, their impact was regulated by making exams much harder. Instead of doing calculations by hand, students were expected to use calculators and spend their cognitive efforts on more complex tasks. Effectively, the bar was significantly raised, which made students work equally hard, if not harder, than before calculators were available. And then continuing, it says, the challenge with AI is that for the most part, educators have not raised the bar in a way that makes AI a necessary part of the process. Educators still require students to complete the same tasks and expect the same standard of work as they did 5 years ago. In such situations, AI can indeed be detrimental. Students can, for the most part, offload critical engagement with learning to AI, which results in metacognitive laziness, end quote. Just meaning if you use AI, which is sort of like a superhuman ability, but you only have to accomplish something that a human could accomplish, then you're just going to offload it entirely, not think about it, save yourself hours and hours and hours of work. And trying to convince students to not do that is not really an option. I think there was like a little bit of time when college professors were trying to figure out like, okay, how can we prevent students from using AI? How can we test their writing to see if we can judge it to be based on AI and punish them for it? And it's this like arms race scenario. Some have gone back to doing essay writing by hand in class,
Mm.
but there are kind of workarounds for that unless they're completely surprise essays and the students don't even know they're coming. Otherwise, there were stories of students like pre, using AI to pre-write an essay and then sort of longhand it into a paper that they would then bring to class. So I find that to be an interesting strategy. It's just, well, look, if AI is part of the new baseline, well, then what I'm going to have you do is going to so far exceed your baseline abilities that you're going to have to use AI, and then you better come up with something that still reaches a reasonable standard.
But again, what is the point? If this is the direction we're headed, then education will be pointless. Like, I think it's funny when we frame it as AI will replace humans. Humans will let AI replace us. That's what I'm seeing. So your degree will be pointless. If you go to college and you don't retain anything because you let ChatGPT do all your work for you, why would an employer want to hire you if they suspect you just got by with AI because that is the world we live in now? And in adult life, why would anyone want to read an essay by you that you didn't even put any effort into and you don't even remember what the content is? So, like, how could it be discussed with its author, which is usually what happens in a human to human employer employee situation? What is the point? Every day, we are getting closer to being the floating blobs watching TV and drinking giant drinks in Wally. Like, and we're gonna like let it happen. Like, we're gonna be like, yeah, that's fine. I'd rather just be a blob sitting in a chair watching TV and let the robots do literally everything, even the stuff that makes us interesting and creative and have joy in our lives. Like, what is the point? This is ridiculous.
I think this AI in school, specifically in college, is downstream from what is the point of college now. And I think a lot of it has become because of the cost of it and what it's used for. It's just a way to get a better job, but you're saddled with debt. So you aren't going there to get a broad based liberal education to make you a more fulfilled person. You're going there to get a job. And if you can just go there to get a job and get through as fast as possible without actually having to learn anything, because what most people find, and I think this is true for anecdotally and maybe even statistically, a lot of the things you do learn in college about the job that you're going to do are unrelated, and you learn most of the stuff you're going to do at your job. And that makes college, this idea that conservatives use that college is a scam, have some validity in the sense that we are using college wrong. We are not using college to make people better critical thinkers, make them more well-rounded human beings, make them learn things that they wouldn't normally have learned, and that just being the point in and of itself. And unless and until we can get to a point where we think that college has a value outside of how much money you're going to make, we're just going to continue going this way. And as Amanda said, and if that's the case, and these people are just using AI to do these things, all they're proving to companies is, well, we don't need to fucking hire them. We'll just hire
Right.
the AI that did the work for them in the first place.
Right. I mean, I agree with you, Deon. I do think like college and debt, all of that is totally true, except we're also seeing this on like the community college level, much less expensive programs and certificate stuff. Like, people are just offloading the work. They just want to get through it and then have that mark of achievement or certification on their resume. So, and maybe I'm just old and like I just don't understand, but like, how do you then show up if you don't actually learn anything as part of whatever you've done to try to get to that next level of, let's say it is only for higher employment and a better salary or something, and you don't do any of the work and therefore you don't retain any of the information, and then you show up and say, I want a job, please give me money, and you don't have the skills. Like, it is much more than just higher education that costs hundreds and thousands of dollars. We're seeing this at every single level of education. And so I don't know what that means. It's like our conversation about foreign policy. Like, it's all like pretend. And we're just playing the game. Like, well, you have the certification on your resume. And so, yep, okay, you can have this job. But we know that you didn't do anything and you just probably used AI for all of your work. Like, I'm spinning out to a world where this is happening nonstop, constantly, everywhere. We're probably not there yet. I'm just very confused at what the point is. And people are spending money on the education and then are defaulting to AI to do the work for them. What a ridiculous waste of your money.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but I am going to offer a different framework. And it's like bleaker than Dion's because, like, yes, expense, but I actually think that it's the younger generation thinking everything is pointless and it's
Mhm.
super bleak out
There
here.
is a real that's real.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
it's just a piece of paper is coming up more and more. I feel like these generations watched millennials go and be super educated, get in
And
debt, and then they're also getting jobs that had nothing to do with the degree that they have, or like they're actually doing nothing that they studied. That to me would signal, yeah, this is kind of bullshit. This is what we quote have to do in order to get the job. But I think ever more they also think those jobs aren't there. Like I'm not actually going to have to know how to do XYZ because I'm not going to get a job in that field. Like my best hope is to get hired by one of these bullshit things that uses AI, and then I will be super qualified for that. Like I think it's just
yeah.
very bleak out there.
Yeah, no, you're probably hitting on exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like, Amanda, that you brought up the bullshit framework of foreign policy. Just a quick refresher that we talked in a previous episode about how, on an international level, countries do what individual people can do to just sort of like get what you need out of someone else and save a little face. And look, like, I don't really want to fight with you, but I'm going to pretend like I'm going to, so that I can retain my pride, but then you don't hit me back, that kind of thing. And so, like, international relations is built on self reinforcing bullshit that is mutually beneficial to everyone involved. When it's mutually beneficial, that's when it can hold. But the reason that won't be the case in the business owners versus potential, employee hiring is that it's not mutually beneficial for a hiring manager to be like, well, I know you don't really have the skills and you didn't really learn anything in college, but you've got the certificate, so I'll hire you anyway. Because you're going to
Mm.
have someone who doesn't have the skills to do the job. And
Right, you just won't
the,
find out
the,
till you've hired them.
so what I was thinking is that if the colleges let kids go through and like, well, you got a passing grade, whatever, then employers are going to be like, you know what? I'm going to have to do an entrance exam. I'm going to have to
Mhm.
make sure that you can actually write something. And the point is that everyone knows that AI is going to be used. That's going to be the job. The job is going to be use AI to write something that is good, which is the whole point that I started with,
Mm.
which is that
Mhm.
if you don't know how to write well, and then you use AI to do a lot of your writing for you, you won't even know that the product you've created sucks. But the hiring agent will, and they're not going to hire you because even using AI, you created something that isn't good enough. So the jobs will be, yeah, AI is going to be infused in it for sure. So you'd better use AI and your own personal judgment to create stuff that is amazing and do it super quickly. That's going to be the expectation. And so the next article, that it was quite long, I don't know if everyone read it, but an English teacher went around interviewing college students about their use of AI. And these kids talk about how, like, well, yeah, I spent like 30 or 40 minutes. I wrote 2 papers. If I hadn't used AI, it would have taken 8 or 9 hours. I remember nothing of what I wrote. If that's what kids are doing in college, they're gonna get to the other side of college and not know if what they're creating is good or not.
But what always makes my mind explode about that framing is that's what you're there for. They're like, "Oh, I had to spend all this time doing the education that I paid for to make my brain better." And, like, they're like, "Ugh, I don't wanna do that." That's a crazy thing to say. You're learning how to think. That is what you're
Yeah.
supposed to be doing. And, like, full disclosure, I'm a writer. I went to school for journalism. My whole career is in writing and communications. I am obviously very sensitive to a world where everybody decides that this is not a valuable thing. But also, I remember when I got my first job, I was told, "We're so glad you can write. A lot of the kids graduating school right now can't do that." And so, like, at one point, and that was, almost 20 years ago now, that was still a, "Wow, we're seeing a lot of kids come out of college not being able to, like, put sentences together. We're really glad that you have that skill." And now we're at a point where everyone's just like, "You don't need that." Just use AI. Whew, that's a big shift.
I think you're also coming from the perspective of wanting college to be about education and learning, and like that's not necessarily what it is.
So I can understand that perspective. I would push back a little bit. Like, I don't know what it's like now. I obviously can't speak to it now. I do think there's a lot of value that happens in colleges in terms of
I don't.
learning how to think and evaluating and creating analysis and all of that. Like, I, I don't know, maybe I misunderstood where you were going with that. But
No, so I mean, I don't disagree, and that's how I view education. But to others, I mean, one, you don't have systems where students are actually set up to thrive. For example, someone who's leaning on AI, most youth are not just going to school. There's something going on in the background. Like me, I was already working, going to school, and then obviously I was involved in organizations and making myself more marketable for when I graduated. So like we're not setting them up in a bubble where they can go and build on their critical thinking. So I don't disagree with what I think education should be, but I'll also push back a little bit because you and I are a few years apart.
mhm.
That by the time I was through college, I remember feeling like this is a business. They are taking every little penny that I can offer, and I am leaving here with a piece of paper and a shit ton of debt at 22 years old. So, like, I remember by the end having a bad feeling about every new edition of a book that I had to buy, even though the chapters were just like slightly rearranged and there was some new updated wording.
Yeah. I
Like, I
mean,
didn't
college is
actually, yeah. And like
obscenely
parking,
expensive. Yeah.
like there's so many things that go into it that just create that feeling of like, no, this isn't just an educational institution.
Yeah, it's
This
extracting.
is a business. Yeah.
And it is. It absolutely is. And I'm not saying we shouldn't fix those things. I'm like definitely
Yeah.
for
No,
like
for sure.
restructuring, and like I think we
Yeah.
were talking about the elite universities a few episodes ago, and there's a lot wrong with them. They need
Mhm.
to be fixed at nearly every level. But the core of what is being taught there, is it philosophy that you'll never use? No, it's how to think about concepts so that you can be a person who lives in the world and be thoughtful and think critically. And yeah, I think that probably because of all of the, well, it's a capitalist mindset that colleges
Yeah.
have turned into these like major businesses, that even if they're still offering the things that are good at those universities, the fact that they are extracting unbelievable sums of money is tainting the whole thing. Right. And
Yeah.
so I can absolutely understand leaving being like, ugh, what was that for? Even if you did get value out of it, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
and looking at funding priorities, right? Like always putting more funding into the majors that are quote going to like lead pipelines into these businesses versus like liberal arts
Yeah.
or
Yeah. They're getting rid of the
things that are viewed as
humanities.
softer.
Yeah.
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 And I will say that we're framing college as if people are only writing papers and doing essays. Like I know there's
Yeah.
still multiple choice tests. Like I would hope that, you know, someone in the hard sciences is definitely doing more than just using AI. Like I really hope so. Maybe I'm being optimistic, who knows? But
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this has to do with where we started at the very beginning of our conversation about how we would prefer to be talking about systemic solutions, and
Yeah.
lacking access to any systemic solutions, we're trying to mitigate. And so a lot of what we're saying is sort of directed at people who are going to be tempted to use AI, and we're trying to explain why that's going to be actively detrimental. So, if you're a parent of a child, you should know what's going to be detrimental to them. If you're a college student, this long form article did talk about the range of ways students use AI, because there are ones who try to be like very judicious. They're like, I just use it a little bit. I try to organize some stuff. I try to, get some ideas. But then those people were super judgmental of the students they know who use it for almost literally everything. They would be given a set of questions which included things like, tell us about yourself, tell us about your background. And a kid would use AI to fill in a paragraph about their own life, you know?
Yeah.
And so, it's like there's a huge range of how it can be used. But I mean, college kids feel like adults, but they're not. And like just saying, you're supposed to want to be working hard right now, like that's going to work on some, but not others. There's always going to be a bell curve of how a message like that lands. And so, I mean, we're trying to take a bigger perspective and understand that it seems like, at least for now, the use of AI is basically inevitable for these students. It's too tempting. It is a very highly addictive drug that makes things so much easier. It's basically impossible to resist. And the idea of like, well, but for my own self enrichment, I will spend 8 hours writing that paper instead of 30 minutes is too big of an ask,
Oh, I know.
particularly of someone who's, 20 years old. And we can lament that, but until we have systemic solutions, that's the way things are. I mean, the closest thing to a systemic solution was something we already mentioned, that what if professors made the work requirement enormously more difficult? So that like, yeah, you're going to use AI, but you're still going to work really hard to reach the goal that we have set. That is a way of making people use their brains, knowing that they're going to use AI at the same time. But the next like major element of this long form piece where they went and talked to a bunch of college students, I just found this really interesting. It's this sort of dissociation from work that is created with AI. And I sort of argue based on these quotes that it's a bit of a defense mechanism for, I mean, college kids are emotionally vulnerable. They're worried about how people are judging them. But I mean, everyone sort of is, but definitely people that age. And so I pulled 3 quotes that get to the heart of this. It says, many students claim to be unbothered by AI's mistakes. They appear nonchalant about the question of achievement and even dissociated from their work since it is only notionally theirs. And then asking a particular student, it says, quote, Alex, the NYU student, said that if one of his AI papers received a subpar grade, his disappointment would be focused on the fact that he'd spent $20 on his subscription, which is brutal. And then this one is the real defense mechanism. So this is quoting from a kid who used AI, submitted it to the teacher, and then the teacher loved it. And it says, quote, her professor identified her essay as exemplary work, and she was asked to read from it to a class of 200 students. And the kid says, I was a little nervous, she said, but then she realized, quote, if they don't like it, it wasn't me who wrote it,
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Mm.
And like, it's not just the saving time and effort, but like the instinct to protect yourself with a self-defense mechanism like that of, I don't want to put myself out there. I don't
be
want to make myself
criticized.
vulnerable. And
Mhm.
I sort of worry, I mean, all the conversation, I'm sure the things we're saying are already permeating into college campuses. And the broad-based idea that young people today like cannot read or write is probably just exacerbating their hesitancy to write something and have someone read it and judge it. So it's probably creating a feedback loop where they're more likely to depend on AI and be like, hey, if you don't like it, it wasn't me.
This feeds into cringe culture. Like this idea that, oh, that's cringe, that this fear of for a second being thought to be lame.
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable is the right word, but whatever they want to describe it as, because the more we isolate ourselves, the more difficult it is to be in community with other people and have the opportunity to be laughed at, be the butt of a joke. A lot of these kids that are, not kids anymore, but
Young adults.
legal adults, but still kids, haven't spent a lot of time just making fun of each other or having the conflicts that they need to have to just get over it. As a person who has worked in some sort of form of the service industry for almost 30 years now, all of that's been beaten out of me. There's literally nothing that can be said to me that I'm going to take personal. It's just, but that took a lot of time. And a lot of having that happen and being in uncomfortable situations and learning how to deal with that. And I fear for kids. And I see it as a parent that I sometimes am aware of that situation, and I put my daughter in situations that she doesn't get the opportunity to be the butt of the joke or fail a lot of times. And I'm trying to be more conscious of that and trying to make her do things. Like yesterday, she's building a little headphone holder herself. And I mean, she's never going to hear this. It looked terrible, but my first instinct was to jump in and try to help her do it. But no, let her fail. And that
Better yet,
is
make fun of her for it.
I think that might be a little far. It's a little different when you're, as a parent, you make fun of. If another kid had made fun of her, absolutely. But that's what a lot of people are missing when they don't write the paper. And it doesn't fucking matter. Like I didn't write it, so you don't like it, cool. You do like it, also cool. You have no ownership, and you're missing a key part of being a human being. Like that story, it triggered something. Like my freshman year, I wrote a paper, and my composition teacher, like 101 composition teacher, made me read it out loud because he didn't think I wrote it. And then we got to talk. And then at the end of the year, he wrote me this long letter about what I should be doing, how I could be doing, like an ability that I have that I didn't take to heart because I'm not a writer. But that kind of human connection, that was my first like real kind of man-to-man with someone that was much older than me. And these kids are never going to get that because they're not doing their own work. That's the real sad part to me about this, is they're missing out on stuff that they don't know they're missing. And how do you get your kids to know that they are missing out on something when the tool is so easy? If you can write a paper in 20 minutes as opposed to doing 2 weeks of research. I remember sitting in libraries. I remember using the Dewey Decimal System and know, that kind of shit. So there is a benefit for sure, the time saving, because there's also a lot of fun things you want to be doing in college that isn't sitting in a room staring at a computer screen. But you're missing some huge, huge growing opportunities.
And how do you make them care about missing those things? I mean, that's the part that, you know, we can't imagine not living in the world that we grew up in. And I'm not saying it was perfect, by far it was not, but we are now losing things that are like essential to society being healthy and skill sets that make society healthy. And they don't have any prior context for that. So we can be the old people that tell them, back in my day, da 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 da, but that doesn't make them care. That doesn't make them be like, oh man, I wish I had that, or I wish I was getting that skill, or, you know, I wish it was different. That's nearly impossible.
Maybe we could warn them that if they lean too heavily on AI, that they will become like delusional to the point of psychosis. that might scare them straight. The next article, getting away from college students a little bit, The Atlantic wrote, "What happens when people don't understand how AI works?" And I think I want to put this in the framing of the inoculation theory. So in the world of conspiracy theories, if a person knows about a conspiracy theory and they like the reality of it before they come across it sort of naturally, if they know, oh, there's this conspiracy theory going online, but here's the reality behind it, and then they come across the theory in the wild, they'll be like, oh, it's that thing. It's that thing that's not true. That's the inoculation theory. It's hugely successful in mitigating the spread of conspiracy theories if you can get people to know about how a conspiracy theory works ahead of time. They're much less susceptible. And so similarly, if you can get people to deeply understand what AI is, how LLMs work, what they do and do not do, they're far less likely to misuse them, abuse them, fall victim to them, and so forth. So this article says, quote, Many people fail to grasp how large language models work, what their limits are, and crucially, that LLMs do not think and feel, but instead mimic and mirror. They are AI illiterate, understandably, because of the misleading ways its loudest champions describe the technology, and troublingly, because that illiteracy makes them vulnerable to one of the most concerning near term AI threats: the possibility that they will enter into corrosive relationships, intellectual, spiritual, and romantic, with machines that only seem like they have ideas or emotions. End quote. And I think we're going to hold the conversation of delusional AI relationships for the member section, but that is a huge problem, and very clearly those who know the least about how these systems work are the ones most susceptible to that exact danger. But sort of pulling back into the broader perspective on Silicon Valley, I mean, this is part of the problem with being young is you weren't around 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and you weren't conscious enough to witness kind of how social media progressed from where it started and the promises made to where we are today. And this paragraph gets at that whole thing pretty well. It says, quote, "Many world transforming Silicon Valley technologies from the past 30 years have been promoted as a way to increase human happiness, connection, and self understanding, in theory, only to produce the opposite in practice. These technologies maximize shareholder value while minimizing attention spans, literacy, and social cohesion. And they frequently rely on grueling and at times traumatizing labor performed by some of the world's poorest people." End quote. In short, like, there's plenty of reason to be skeptical, always, of these new things. And this is the problem of new technologies. Futurist technologists have been pinpointing this for decades and decades. Questioning new technology is always important because it's so much easier to see the benefits than it is to see the inevitable downsides. And the only way to even sort of excavate what the potential downsides are is by asking hard questions and being skeptical. But humans aren't great at that, which is why, we're sort of resigned in this conversation that, like, maybe we can do some mitigation, but people are going to people. They're going to follow the path of least resistance to their detriment. Humans have done that always.
Yeah, I think the only thing you can do is looking at it and how can someone extract a profit from this? And that's how you're going to see it used. I'm sure it'll get real interesting in the next 20 years of what people are doing with AI. Because the susceptibility, especially of people who don't have critical thinking skills or, again, have a understanding that lets them know how the information is being regenerated to them. Yeah, it's a huge market to prey on people.
I do think this episode is, I think, directed towards parents as far as mitigation. Like, what influence do you have over the average teenager? None. You have a lot of influence over younger children. Like, this is something you're going to have to teach your younger children about. It sucks to say this, but as we're talking and have this conversation, I really do feel like we have a lost generation. Like, a generation is lost to
Mm-hmm.
this. There's
Yep.
us older that grew up having to learn all these skills and getting AI dumped onto us. And then there's this group of people who didn't have to have the skills. They've had AI dumped on them and how to use it and all these things, and having no knowledge of what it is, how to use regular skills, let alone this tool. They don't have a lot of hope in their future. And honestly, I don't have a lot of hope in them. There was like this stretch where a lot of memes were like, the youth is going to save us. The kids are all right. No,
Mm.
the kids are alt-right. They are easily susceptible to
Oof, yeah.
Oh
like
boy.
the fascist propaganda. And
Mhm.
I think it's just because of this reliance on the internet anyway. Their critical thinking skills, their ability to detect what's real, what's fake is just very strained anyway. Then you add this seemingly real tool that is full of holes. They call the hallucinations that came up a lot, that it
Yeah.
hallucinates. And I think that is a terrible way to phrase it. It softens what it's doing. It's lying. It's pretending that it knows something that it doesn't. and presenting it as fact. So
Yeah, it's misinformation.
Well,
misinformation.
and both of those phrases inappropriately anthropomorphizes the
Yeah.
system in the first place.
Right.
It's neither
Yeah.
hallucinating nor lying.
Yeah.
It's
It's
a
just
bullshit machine. It
Yeah.
creates text that accuracy is not even one of the elements it is trying to
Yeah.
succeed at. It's just trying to calculate what kind of makes the most sense, which means it'll be accurate sometimes and not other
Yeah.
times. And it doesn't know which is which.
I forget which article it was, but they were talking about that anthropomorphizing AI thing and why the CEOs talk about it like a person, because they want you to feel like it is basically human. That is part of the whole underlying business model. But the reality is, and this article from The Atlantic did a really good job of framing this, it is copying us. It is just copying us. It can be a perfect mimic. And because our brains are not wired to interact with a mechanical tool that reflects our humanity, even though it is not our humanity, we will fall victim to that. We don't have anything in our wiring to protect us against interacting with something that sounds just like a human, even though it is not. But like calling it a copy, calling it a mimic of humanity should be how we talk about it more often, because I think people, even people who have read about it and like I think understand it better than most, fall victim to the, well, gee, it said this thing the other day and that sounded like it came up with its own original thought. Like they fall into that, oh my God, oh my God. And it is scary. It is scary to see that. But it is just a bunch of calculations based on inhaling stuff that humans have created. And so, like, it may turn out that the fear about AI is much more about the humans who create it and sell it and the impacts on those who believe it is really sentient than the technology itself. Because the technology itself, while very impressive and scary, is just trying to copy us and basically fool us. It's a manipulation tool at the end of the day.
What Deon said made me really sad
No,
about the
no.
generation that has been lost. So I
Yeah.
do feel the need to, one, point out that millennials are trash.
Woo!
Because we too know all the harms and we still engage in the heroin usage. So I'll put that out there. But secondly, like, it is, quote, the adult's failure that led to this generation being experimented on.
Mhm,
And I'm going to use that word because
mhm,
it causes the reaction I'm looking for. Like, they were experimented on
mhm.
with this technology, and now we're seeing the results of it. And yes, turns out the technology doesn't make great citizens. It also doesn't, I mean, I guess, what do you want your labor class to be? Like, do you want them to be mindless
Drones.
people who don't love what they do? I guess it makes a good case for replacing the labor class. I don't know. But yeah, I definitely would like to take some responsibility, not personally, but as a generation. And Gen Xers should probably do the same. Deon, I know you're on the cusp, so
Yeah.
we're going to have to make you take responsibility for that.
Absolutely. I don't want to blame them for this at
Oh,
all.
and I
Yeah,
didn't take it
Yeah,
I
that
was
way.
gonna say the
because
same thing. Yeah.
it
No, no, no,
is
no.
100%. I mean, it would be no different than putting a child outside and saying, "Go get some food. Good luck. You're on your own." It's not the kid's fault when they come back starving. That's what we've done, and I really do think they're aging into a point where I do believe in the ability of people to change and grow and learn and improve. However, I think there's limitations to that, and I think at some point you become who you are. And I think we are watching a generation become who they are just without a lot of basic building blocks for being successful, productive, happy adults.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a reminder, we were having this conversation before AI came on the
Yeah,
scene.
about
Yep.
social media.
The line I always think about is from Bo Burnham's song Welcome to the Internet. Mommy let you use her iPad, you were barely 2, and it did all the things we designed it to do.
Mhm.
Oof.
Like,
Mhm.
they had no choice. They were given this thing. Adults designed it, and it the best thing you could possibly say about that is like maybe it was a mixed bag, but I'm much happier saying like that was bad.
Yeah.
Fucks
And
kids up.
And the people that designed it don't let their own children use it. So,
Right.
that said a lot.
If you even need any more evidence, exactly. All the Silicon Valley people don't let their kids use anything they create.
Right. Right. And I mean, I'm just going to add on to what Deon was saying. Like, I don't want to come across as blaming them. I have young people in my life who I love and respect and think they're great people. They're still missing some like
Mhm.
pretty essential components to making it in this world. And I guess what I worry about is the constant feeling of, like you were saying earlier, Erin, that there's nothing for me in the future. There's nothing.
Mhm.
Why am I doing this? What's the point? A very like kind of nihilistic attitude is also just depression in another form, and a generation of depressed, isolated people who are lacking some like key social skills. I'm not just sad for them, I'm sad for all of us because we're all here together. It doesn't matter what generation you're in. We
Yeah.
all experienced what has happened since the internet came on the scene to now. Of course, there's much larger problems, and we talk about those all the time.
Yes.
But like
Yeah.
when we're talking about the impact of technology and what has changed in just the time since all of us have been born, that's a dramatic shift in society. It is a huge, huge transformation. And we have not protected the things that we should have held close as our core values. We just have not protected them. And of course, capitalism has accelerated that, and they have fed off of it and used it to their advantage to make trillions and trillions of dollars, right? And when I say they, I mean CEOs and corporations. And maybe this is the most important thing, under the guise of we're helping humanity, of we're making things
Mhm.
better, of everything's going to be great, all that techno-optimism bullshit from the tech bros. And we didn't stop it. Collectively, we didn't stop it because progress and the image and idea of progress is so important to us that we just thought if you're against anything, then you're behind the times. Then you're a Luddite. And I feel like that person more and more, that I'm just like, I need a cane in hand to yell at everything that's happening and changing. But I don't think that that's a cranky old person anymore. I think that that's just a valid viewpoint in our society today where things are getting very obviously worse.
Yeah.
I will just point out quickly that I see stories all the time. I mean, they're not representative of a bulk or a majority, but there are young people who recognize the bullshit of the technology they use
Mhm.
and are making the conscious decision to extract themselves from it. There are communities of college students or younger being like, no, 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 I want a dumb phone. So you're right, Amanda. It is not just an old person with a cane concept anymore. Like, you can be any age and be like, you know what, this is bullshit. I want to wrap up today with a discussion because I think that discussing the benefits actually helps bolster the validity of arguments about the downsides. And so I don't want this conversation to be doom and gloom. These are the downsides. We should all be sad and angry about it. So to close, first, I want to talk about this very famous story, but it was from 1990. So maybe people haven't heard it recently or at all. But Steve Jobs, who's now dead, but he was very young at the time, but famous and founder of Apple, made this story famous because it was just a thing he said, but he used an analogy about a study about locomotion, the amount of energy it takes for an entity, it was studying various species, how much energy it takes an animal to travel a distance. And the condor with huge wings was extremely efficient. It was the most efficient animal to be able to travel a kilometer. And humans were like not so good. But this was published in Scientific American, and Scientific American had some insight to test the efficiency of a human on a bicycle. And once you put a human on a bicycle, they were way more efficient than a condor. And so Steve Jobs uses this as like a positive story about the power of the human ability to use tools. And that is what made him say that a computer is like a bicycle for the mind. It is a tool that we can use to greatly improve what a human brain can do by itself. Now, of course, in 1990, a computer was nothing but a tool. It didn't do anything on its own. It had no opinions. It wasn't trying to get you to use it. It wasn't sending you push notifications to remind you to check in with your friends or anything like that so that you would see more ads. So, where he was coming from is very different than where we are now. And we sort of talked before we got started on today's show about all of these comparative analogies from the past, the calculator, the computer, the advent of Google. Like there's a panic every time a new major technology comes along, that the fear is that this is going to sort of prevent humans from being their full selves, because we're going to offload some of what we used to do to technology. And I think my takeaway is, yeah, that's true to some degree, and it's always a balance, or the struggle is to find the balance.
Yeah.
How do we use a tool that, yeah, like it's going to mean that we don't have to think that hard and we're going to lose a skill, but maybe we would thoughtfully choose that trade off. But all of this brings us to, there was an argument written up Sacramento Bee, a activist with the Sunrise organization, climate change nonprofit, wrote, progressive grassroots activist groups must adopt AI or risk irrelevance. And they go into some detail about how I think born out of the exact skepticism we've been describing, left-wing groups are much more hesitant to integrate AI into their work. And the fear this person is expressing is that our ideological opponents do not have that problem. They're like, AI, great. Slop, bring it.
Which is what our entire recent episode was about.
Exactly. And our episode dove into that quite a bit. And so this person gives examples about how these left-wing organizers should be using AI. And I think the examples they give are debatable. Like some are debatable and some are probably pretty solid. And it has to do with whether the AI implementation is about presenting something public facing versus making your internal work more efficient. And to me, that's all about knowing your audience. So they say, imagine this: a neighborhood association in Sacramento sends out a generic mass text, while another down in Fresno uses an artificial intelligence chatbot to craft individualized text messages to supporters. Which will draw a bigger crowd to the next meeting? It's almost certainly the group that embraces new technology. Simply put, grassroots organizations that ignore artificial intelligence will fall behind, end quote. And that's an example of one that I think is hugely debatable, because a left-wing organization reaching out to their left-wing supporters with hyper individualized
Scary as
text,
shit.
scary as shit, means holy shit, that's super creepy. I do
Yeah.
not like that message that you sent me that knows way too much about me or says something way too specific for my interests and might creep people out, will definitely make some percentage of activists be like, oh, they're using AI, fuck them.
Mhm.
And people will immediately turn off from that. So that one's like hugely, hugely debatable. There are other examples that are similarly debatable, but they also get into like supercharging efficiency just within the organization, automating tedious tasks. Volunteers spend less time on paperwork. They say they use AI to draft press releases, generate hundreds of slogans for picket signs, and they say that hours long chores can now happen in seconds. Those things that happen internally, that is probably where AI belongs in a left wing context. It doesn't matter as much for the right. They are not as critical of AI. And so, getting back to the very beginning of this about knowing the fundamentals, whether you're writing an essay or doing a math problem with a calculator, you have to know the fundamentals well enough to know when the technology is going to help you and when it's going to hold you back. And I really just want to emphasize that the same goes for being an organizer, because I want the left to succeed, I want them to use tools that are the most effective, whatever that turns out to be. So you have to really deeply know the fundamentals of being an effective organizer before you implement AI. Because if you don't, you might do the thing where you send out hyper individualized text messages that creeps people out. To me, that's an oversight where someone doesn't really know their audience as well as they need to before implementing the new technology.
I like that you both were on the same page about it being creepy. My train of thought was, oh, so you took like human to human interaction and automated it. Like
Well,
that's
that's gross
which
too.
is the
Yeah.
reality of most, but like that to me is the part that we shouldn't automate. That is an opportunity. If you want to send individualized text, like absolutely, like to me, that would be a good use of time to connect with individual people, like again, person to person. Obviously, time-wise, we can debate about things like that, but to me, that's not what I would use AI for. I would use AI for the tedious things that also don't connect people to the movement or the cause.
Right.
Because, like, when you were saying slogans, I was thinking, well, shit, like, people love not
I
everyone,
know.
but people really love that.
I
Like,
know.
I'm sure there are multiple people. And I think in large part, how we utilize technology in our lives is often not to make our lives better so that we have more time to volunteer and come up with slogans for some great cause, but to do like housework, cook, clean, and I don't know, maintenance, if you will, of like everyday things. That's shit I would love to automate. Like a robot coming to my house making me dinner, like hell yeah.
I know. I've been
But
actually asking that specific question a lot. Why aren't robots making us dinner? But I digress. But on your point, Erin, about what you would use it for, as long as we've been having this AI conversation, the only points that seem valid to me for a use of AI are the data analysis and like math type things, or even like assisting with diagnoses in a medical setting because they can search more than a human could search, in terms of databases and
yeah.
journals and studies and whatever. Like those kinds of things have always felt to me like the right application. And so they mentioned is one of the examples in this article, using that to analyze data you get from the people in your network and, the people you're trying to reach and just like assessing how many of these people feel this way and you're taking surveys and all that. That all seems totally fine to me. What did strike me though is they talked about, just as a little caveat, I'm sorry, this is in the next article from Harvard. It said, I want to be very clear that I do not endorse any specific model or tool, and I firmly encourage everyone to consider privacy risks and potential ties to adversaries. And I thought, that's just a throwaway kind of caveat, but that's actually really important. The people who run these companies are not our friends on the left. And what concerns me is that if we do implement tools from these companies and they become like part of the basic machinery of the movement and they decide at some point, eh, suddenly our tool isn't for everyone because Trump told us it couldn't be or something. What's stopping them from sabotaging the movement or throwing up barriers? Like there's a giant risk there. I think that has to be taken into consideration. We do not know where this is headed. And, they've talked about how they're not going to regulate in any way. And so that means it's on the companies, and the companies are beholden to whatever the current administration feels they want to do. And so we are risking a lot by depending on these companies. And we do this beyond AI. Like we are all risking a lot by depending on these companies that have no allegiance to anybody except money.
That's the core of all this, I think, is, we're talking about AI and the problems it has, but we're not really talking about the problems of AI. We're talking about the problems that AI has been dumped into. When Jay brought up the inoculation theory of how to deal with the conspiracy theories, I was kind of thinking about how we were all inoculated to varying degrees about how awesome America is. America's number one. America's great. And that's why we find ourselves, I think, in this situation where everything's falling apart because we decided over and over again, well, it's great. We're the best. We're number one. Great. We're the best. Number one. And I think on the left, always, we have been able to see more clearly the flaws of America Your mileage will vary depending on how much you were sold that idea that America's great. Whereas the right has this funhouse mirror version where they hate everything about America, but also think America's great, it's the best, et cetera, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera. And this artifice of America falling apart simultaneous to the dumping of this giant tool that creates artifice and fake and nothing real, but also could be an amazing tool to be used in specific ways, but is trying to be pushed as an all-encompassing replacement for everything, I guess, eventually. It's such a tight wire act that we're on the left trying to perform here.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, like Jay said, the right, who cares?
Yeah,
Bring it
I
in.
agree.
Let's do it. It's great. And we're always going to be fighting with one hand tied behind our back. I don't want to get too deep into the Superman movie, but I think we all saw it. And the character of Superman being portrayed in a more hopeful way on screen, I think, is kind of exactly what's going on here. That character is super strong, super powerful, but is fighting with a limitation that he doesn't want to hurt other people. He cares
Mhm.
about other people. He could just destroy everything and do whatever he wants, but he doesn't want to because he cares about other people. That is a limitation on what he can do. And that's a limitation on what people on the left can do with this tool, because we don't want to hurt people.
Mhm.
Fundamentally, at our core, we want things to be better for people. And if you're using a tool that part of it, like the side effect could be that it destroys entire industries, leaves people homeless, leaves people without any opportunity to take care of themselves, kind of writes them out. That's scary stuff. So when we're using this tool, it's not just, is this good for this job? It's a big, big proposition, and we have to start thinking about it on bigger terms. And the companies themselves aren't going to do it. So we have to start thinking about it and creating our own frameworks.
Mhm.
And the unfortunate reality is that people on the left with ethics boycotting AI isn't going to make it go away.
No, I know.
There aren't enough people.
No.
So there was like a 4th of July barbecue that we attended. A bunch of do-gooders were there. One guy told a story, works for Greenpeace, told a story about going and observing a melting glacier. And he said that about 80% of the people looking at the glacier were thrilled. They were taking selfies. They thought it was so cool. And about 20% of the people were sitting there nearly catatonic in very sad, contemplative silence. And I said, that sounds like a really good summary of all of modernity and society. There are 80% of people who are like, cool, whatever, something new
Yeah.
and shiny. And 20% of people are really, really, really concerned. And that 20% of people is not enough to put the brakes on. And so that is what's at the core of this debate of, are we going to voluntarily not use a tool like this out of concern for ethics, which are totally valid, and fight with both hands tied behind our backs instead of only one? Like, that's a really tough thing to try to navigate. But, multiple of us have said that internal stuff, data analysis, things that can make your job more efficient, you can get more done as a beleaguered, underfunded, understaffed nonprofit organization. That's the core problem for left-wing organizations. They never have enough people, they never have enough volunteers, they can never get enough work done. And if AI can help them in those ways, that's where the tool belongs. And so that's why it's super important to know the difference. Know your audience, know how these tools are going to be used, how they're going to be seen, how you might get backlash for it, all of those sorts of things. So what I want to conclude with is a message to everyone on the left. Organizers first. The point of this whole article is be careful. Make sure you know the fundamentals before you offload to AI. Just the same way A writer needs to know the fundamentals of writing, just the way a student learning math needs to know the fundamentals before they start leaning on a calculator. As an organizer, you have to know the fundamentals that will guide you so that you don't make missteps while you experiment with new tools. The flip side, though, because this is so endemic to the left, is for activists, those like deeply involved in politics who care deeply, be gentle with people who are experimenting, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube or an organization that you're connected to. If they start experimenting with AI, feel free to write them a message and say, like, I'm not sure that's a good use of your time. Don't say, fuck you, I'm out. That is how the left shoots itself in the foot. And understand shows like us and organizations like we are all experimenting because we're trying to do the best we possibly can. And so you cannot condemn people preemptively for experimenting. And it will only be harmful to the movement as a whole if we start coming down on people too hard for those types of experimentations. But some experiments are going to work and some aren't, and that's okay. But we're so early in this new era that you got to let people feel their way a bit and have empathy, give grace to people even when they misstep, and be like, it's okay, I'm not abandoning you, but I'm going to give my input and say, maybe go in another direction.
And maybe consider the environmental impacts.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to consider.
There's a lot to consider.
Is this the Get Off My Lawn episode? Did we do that one? Is that what we're doing?
No, we decided that shaking
We're-
a cane is
okay.
not what we are doing
Okay.
here,
Okay.
Deon.
All right.
Did we mitigate it today? That was our goal. We set a lower bar for ourselves than usual. Did we say enough useful
I
things?
think we mitigated.
We added some mitigation tools. It is
Yeah.
definitely not solved.
Good enough. I'll take it. If you have any thoughts on how to mitigate the deeply, deeply systemic problems we are absolutely not going to solve on a systemic level anytime soon, you can leave us a message at 202-999-3991, send an email to j@bestoftheleft.com, reach us on Signal at bestoftheleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.